Hello, 8th graders. We're continuing our read of The Greatest Treasure Hunt in History, and we are beginning at the middle of page 111, Paris, France, 1944. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Jim Rorimer crossed the 16th century Tuileries Garden. With the war now on Germany's doorstep, more than 150 miles away from Paris, some semblance of normal life had returned, with people strolling through the gardens enjoying a brisk November afternoon. Rorimer smiled. Just 2 months earlier, he'd prevented the army from converting the Jeu de Paume Museum into a post office. That turned out to be relatively easy. Then he managed to get the army to remove hundreds of jeeps, troop carriers, and 10-ton trucks from the historic garden. That had proved the greater challenge. Seeing the citizens of Paris resume some semblance of normal life following the 4 years of Nazi occupation, and knowing he had played a part, left Rorimer feeling good. But now he feared progress had stalled. The urgency in the Parisian air during those initial weeks of liberation had faded. French bureaucracy mixed with army regulations slowed everything down even further, adding to his frustration. As he neared the Louvre Museum, Rorimer zeroed in on what was bothering him the most. If Jacques Jujard was correct, and more than 20,000 works of art had indeed been stolen from French private collectors and dealers, where was the paper trail? Where were the leads? After weeks of digging, he had found only dead ends. Someone knew something, but clearly he hadn't identified who that someone was, not yet, at least. Parisians just wanted to put the horrible memories of occupation behind them and move on with their lives. That greatly impeded his efforts. The scene inside the Louvre looked very different than it had when Rorimer first visited in late August. Visitors, noise, paintings hanging on the walls. Rorimer paused to take it all in and smiled. The Louvre had reopened several weeks earlier, but Rorimer thought only of the 20,000 works of art still missing, and the fact that he had no leads to pursue. He arrived in Jujard's office as a friend in need. When Rorimer began to ask for information, the director rose from his desk, went to his office door, and shut it. Jujard intended for this to be a private conversation between two trusted friends and colleagues who shared a common objective. Rorimer began by expressing his frustration, almost disbelief about the lack of leads, especially given the size of the theft. He knew that the French museum establishment had formed a commission for the recovery of works of art to address this problem, but that was 2 months ago at the end of September. As far as Rorimer knew, the commission hadn't made much progress. Jujard, seeing an opportunity, looked at his friend and said just 2 words: Rose Valland. Sensing confusion, Jujard reminded him that he'd met Valland in passing during one of his previous visits to the director's office. Rorimer apologized. He hadn't really paid her much attention. Jujard smiled. Neither had the Germans. As Rorimer leaned forward in his chair, Jujard opened up with details and descriptions that sent the monument's man hurriedly flipping through his notepad to find a blank page. He wanted to take down every detail. Soon after occupation, the Einstab Reichsrat Rosenberg, or ERR, the Nazi looting organization dedicated to the confiscation of Jewish-owned property, converted the Jeu de Paume Museum into its looting operation headquarters. The museum's central location and proximity to the Louvre made it the ideal clearinghouse for thousands of works of art that the Nazis were stealing from Jews and other private collections. They informed Jujard that they needed one person familiar with the facility who could keep the building operational. He had asked Mademoiselle Valland, the custodian and, for all practical purposes, the curator of the museum, to remain at her position to assist the Germans and to spy for him. Hearing the word spy stunned Rormer. He knew that Jajard had performed heroically to save the National Museum collections from the Nazis, but the risk he must have taken, not to mention those of his spy, Rose Valland, exceeded anything he had imagined. The risks were quite real, Jajard acknowledged, but the opportunity to have someone trusted inside the Nazi looting headquarters, someone who also understood German, was too great to ignore. In October 1940, shortly after the Nazis took control of the Jeu de Paume, Jajard had taken Valland aside and ordered her to remain at her post, no matter what. She accepted this new responsibility without hesitation. In fact, she considered it an honor to have been asked. Take my word on this, Jajard implored his friend. Valland's commitment to saving the art of France should be questioned by no one. While Jajard described the 46-year-old Valland, Rormer furiously scribbled down bullet points of his comments. Middle age, simplicity in her manners, self-reliant, independent, strong-willed manner, indefatigable, never complained about her own personal grievances or discomforts. All this information fascinated Rormer, but his characteristic impatience got the better of him. With a heavy tone of skepticism in his voice, he asked Jajard why, if Valland had all this information, had she not turned it over to the French Commission? And why was Jajard being so forthcoming with an American? Both were good questions, Jajard said. Valland had turned over to the Commission an important list of locations used by Nazi officials in warehouses where they had stored stolen objects in Paris until shipment to Germany. But of course, the Nazi officials, like the stolen objects, were no longer there. However, Valland had not provided other essential information to the Commission about where the objects might be now. Jajard acknowledged that Albert Henriot, head of the French Commission, had asked him to encourage Rormer to speak with Valland. Perhaps by getting to know her, he could earn her trust and find out more details about what she knew. Rormer wanted to know why this woman, a complete stranger, would trust him when she wouldn't trust her own countrymen on the Commission. He also had another concern. Suppose she didn't really have what Jajard thought she had. Maybe her information, if any, was worthless. The wily museum director reasoned that Valland would trust Rormer precisely because he was not French. The problem of collaboration with the Nazis did not end with their departure. One of the city's newspapers, Le Figaro, printed a daily feature titled Les Arrestations et l'Épuration, Arrest and Purges, that detailed the previous day's developments in the pursuit of collaborators. Beneath the article appeared two lists, Les Executions Capitales, death sentences, and Les Executions Sommaires, summary executions. Not certain who could be trusted, Valland was reluctant to turn over all of her information to the French Commission or anyone else. Seen in that light, her hesitation made sense to Rormer. It is true, Jajard continued, that many people do not believe that Valland has any information of substance. He knew otherwise. She had confided some of it to him, much she had not, though, and he agreed with her decision because even he could not guarantee that her information would remain confidential. Rormer, it seemed, was in the best position to gain access to the valuable information gathered by Rose Valland and use it to find France's stolen treasures. Jajard, seeing that his friend didn't appear entirely convinced, reminded him that when the U.S. Army had wanted to convert the Jeu de Paume Museum into a post office, it was Rormer who had taken action to prevent it. Valland was never one to say much, but she didn't miss anything. In her mind, Rormer had saved her museum from suffering through yet another occupation. That had made quite an impression on her, and indeed on everyone in the Paris museum community. At that moment, Rormer's head was spinning with thoughts, doubts, possibilities. Suppose Jajard was right. Valande certainly was in a position to have gathered critical information. Somehow she had managed to avoid being caught or killed. And if she did have a list of what was stolen, where it was, 20,000 works of art, there really wasn't anything to think about. If Jujard or others on the French Commission would help with another introduction, he would, of course, be pleased to meet her. We will stop there and begin on page 118 tomorrow. Getting Help, Florence, Italy, November 1944. Thank you so much, 8th graders. Have a really good afternoon and take care of yourself.